I believe this is a very special event because we are here with our future leaders. Just one point I'd like to say, you'll be relieved to know that that unsigned certificate that Professor Chen showed you, I signed it today for him, so that's good. Chen and I actually go back a long way, and we're good friends, and he's taken me all around Taiwan. I've been privileged to see a lot of Taiwan, but it's actually my first time here in the east in Huilin, and I'm really pleased to be here. This is such a special place. The other thing I'd just like to say is that on Professor Chen's business card now, he's got his occupation as an organic farmer. He's actually graduated from being a professor at 3 universities and is now an organic farmer. I started the other way around. I started over 50 years ago as a youth, as an organic farmer, and now I'm actually a professor or part-time professor at 2 universities with a doctorate of science. So and I'm about to turn 70, so I realize in the next few years I've got to get one more professorship and then I can retire full-time back to being an organic farmer. I've been asked not to talk about my life story, but to actually talk about really the future of us as a species and our children. And the title is based on my first book, The Myths of Safe Pesticides. But my second book was actually the most important. I called it Poisoning Our Children, and it's the parent's guide to the myths of safe pesticides. Trying to get this to work. Which one do I press? This one here? Good, okay, thank you. As Matthew said, it's just so wonderful that we can be finally meeting together, and I know especially for Taiwan, we've just come through a pandemic. The World Health Organization has declared the pandemic over, but there's another one that's even bigger that started before COVID and is still going, and the World Health Organization calls it the global epidemic of non-communicable diseases. And these diseases, such as heart disease, stroke, cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, diabetes, are the leading cause of mortality, the leading cause of death in the world. Far more serious than COVID ever was. And these diseases, you cannot catch them by sitting next to somebody. You don't get Alzheimer's disease or cancer or stroke or heart disease because you're sitting next to somebody. You can't catch it. You get it because of environmental and lifestyle. So this is the good news. This means we can prevent them by changing our habits, by changing the food we eat, to avoid toxic environmental exposures that cause them. And the peer-reviewed science, the gold standard of science, shows that synthetic chemicals and pesticides are strongly implicated in these diseases. So let's talk about pesticides, because what we're told, and I hear it all the time, there's no need to be organic. All the pesticides are scientifically tested as safe. You'd have to eat a truckload to get sick. That's the sort of thing you hear. It doesn't matter if there's residues in our food. We have tested them and they are safe. So let's look at that statement. Well, what have they tested? Well, the majority of pesticides, they are formulations of a number of different ingredients. By law, they really only ever test one. They call it the active ingredient, and quite often that is less than 1%. And then based on that, they make an assumption, and an assumption is not science. They make an assumption that the whole formulation is the same, has the same toxicity. But the independent science, done by independent scientists and published in scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals, the gold standard shows that these compounds, these formulated pesticides, are generally hundreds of times more toxic than the nominated chemical. On top of that, there's no testing for children's health, for reproductive effects, birth defects, cancer, developmental neurotoxicity, epigenetic mutations, hormone, immune, and metabolic symptoms disruptions. Zero. And these are all the issues that contribute to this epidemic of non-communicatable chronic diseases. So there is only one study that's done by an independent scientist published in a scientific journal that looks at the exposure of a standard formulated pesticide at the residue levels that are found in most of us, in our blood, in our urine. Only one lifetime study. We are expected to be exposed to these chemicals over a lifetime, and they're telling these small amounts that we have are safe. What does that one study do? That chemical, by the way, is Roundup. Well, majority of female rats that were treated had mammary tumours. The only one that didn't get a mammary tumour had an ovarian cancer. The other thing that they found is it wasn't just the Roundup, the chemical. They also found that they were testing GMO foods. The GMOs did it, and the combination of GMOs and Roundup. These here are pictures of the tumours that were removed from the animals. Wasn't just tumours. You can actually see damage to the livers and kidneys. That's just one formulated pesticide, but the fact is, in farming, multiple pesticides are approved to be used. So some will be used to kill insects, insecticides. Others are used to kill fungus, fungicide. Others are used to kill plants, herbicides. And it is expected that all of them are used in a normal crop production cycle. Consequently, most food, when it's tested, has multiple residues. And most people, when they are tested, have multiple residues in their urine and their blood. There is zero requirement for testing these chemical compounds, even though they are approved to be used, and all of them are used at the same time, and all of them are found in food, all of them are found in people. Not one test is required to see that they are safe. What they find when we do peer-reviewed studies of these is that they tend to be synergistic. It's more than additive. It's not that 1 and 1 makes 2. 1 and 1 make 2, 3. We have some studies, 1 and 1 is 1,000 times more dangerous than either one. Then the other thing we hear all the time is that, oh, the residues are so low that they don't have any effect. And what we know is that many of these chemicals start to work as hormones at very low levels. And this is in parts per billion and parts per trillion. Part per trillion is the equivalent of 1 drop in 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water. I want you to get this across, that these chemicals can have very profound effects at these low levels. They are called endocrine disruptors, and the fact is they tend to be more dangerous at the lower growth levels because they can cross these special barriers in the cells when they're smaller. So all the, what they call the acceptable daily limit, these residues they have in food, they're at higher levels. Not one chemical in our food has been tested at these lower levels, even though we have over 600 peer-reviewed studies showing the damage that they do. The regulators were supposed to start in the 1990s, and as yet, not one regulator has tested one. They put it in a too hard basket and they're pretending it's going to go away. It's not going away. A lot of these chemicals,
这些很多的化学物质呢，它会干扰荷尔蒙，那它就会变得有点像雌激素，所以很多的生殖的系统就会受影响。刚刚讲到了这么多的流行病，这种生殖的癌症，比如说乳房、子宫颈等等这些很多相关的癌症。
Particularly in developing countries, as countries get more and more pesticides, we find that couples have more and more trouble having babies because of these chemicals and what they're doing, but also what they're doing to causing defects to the genital urinary tracts of babies and children.
所以小孩跟新生儿可能生长也会受到伤害。所以我们在讲的不是那些 DDT 哦，它想要可能降解是非常快。那我们现在设定了一个最高摄取量，那为什么我们还有这种所谓的最大残留量呢？那之所以会有这样子的标准，就是因为农药是会残留呀。
More importantly than this, what we're told is when chemicals break, they break down quickly.
这些化学呢，在分解的时候，它会降解。可是呢，在降解的过程当中，它的这些代谢物其实是非常有毒的。
Many of them are hundreds of % more toxic when they break down. So in fact, the older the chemical is, the more dangerous it is in your food. Then all our countries have regulatory authorities, and their job is to regulate chemicals and make sure that they are safe. That's what they're supposed to do. But they are captured by industry. Instead of basing their conclusions on the gold standard of science, this is what we call peer-reviewed studies in reputable journals by independent scientists without conflicts of interest, they do it the other way around. They just use the studies that are supplied by the pesticide industry. And one of the big problems with these studies is that they are commercial in confidence. We can't see them. We can't get them. So if we want to look at what are the studies that the regulators used and independently review them to see if they are making the right decisions on our behalf, we can't get that information. It is hidden. When we get it, and every now and then we get it, it gets leaked to us, or we can use legal channels sometimes to get it, we find that these studies are either very poor, they're not good enough to be published in a scientific journal, or when we look at the data, we actually find that the data clearly shows the damage. They're hiding it. That's why they don't want us to see these studies. Then you have the revolving door. You see it all the time. Pest managers from the pesticide industry get jobs as managers in the regulators. Then they approve their old employers' chemicals. Next thing you know, they now get a job back as a vice president or higher position in the pesticide industry. And this is corruption as well. That the fact is that people who are paid by the pesticide industry are making decisions about pesticides instead of independent scientific experts. The word for this is regulatory capture, and it's a major problem around the world, and it's an example of why, even though, for instance, the EU and the US governments tasked their regulator with basically regulating and banning all these endocrine disruptors, not one has been done, is because they are captured, not because they are lazy. This is the one which I think is really important here, because most of you are young people, you are parents or about to become parents, and this is the area where pesticide regulation is its most shameful. The special requirements of the unborn, the fetus, the newborn and growing children in relation to what's called developmental neurotoxicity, that's the development of nerves. And don't forget, our brain is our biggest collection of nerves, and numerous other diseases. It's actually subject to what we call data-free assumptions. Data-free means they have no data, no scientific data, and they make an assumption. That's not science. So, but currently, there is no requirement for regulatory authorities to specifically test for the effects on the unborn, newborn children, and the other really important time is when people are going through puberty. The fetus and the newborn, the growing child, does not have the protective liver enzymes that we have as adults. As adults, we have, in our liver, we have enzymes that can break down small amounts of pesticides. They have none, zero, which means that they cannot break down the smallest level of a toxic pesticide. So the smallest amount, doesn't matter how small it is toxic and does damage. And the peer-reviewed testing shows this. And what it shows is that these small amounts are leading to lower IQs, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, autism spectrum, organ damage to kidney, liver, lungs, reproductive tract, autoimmune diseases such as asthma, lack of physical coordination, loss of temper, anger management, the bipolar schizophrenia spectrum of illness, depression and childhood suicide. And the other one is childhood obesity, because these endocrine disruptors, hormone disruptors, disrupt the normal hormone system of children. It's not just eating junk food. So I want to show you this. This is the increase in the number of children with autism in the US. That's the yellow bars. And the red line is the increase of Roundup, of glyphosate, that was used in the United States, as introduced for the Roundup-ready GMO crops. And when in the 1990s, when they introduced it, the rate of glyphosate went up, and so did the rate of autism. By the way, that graph continues to go up. It finishes in 2010, but it's actually exponentially curving at the moment. So it's not going down. We did what's called a Pearson's correlation coefficient. I feel sorry for the translators trying to translate that one. What it is, it's a standard tool that we use to see whether one causes the other. Generally in science we say correlation does not equal causation, but we have tools to see, is it an accident or does one cause the other? Well, with this tool we've found that the chance that it's an accident is 1 in 10,000. It's a really strong probability. This, by the way, is a peer-reviewed paper. If that was a medicine and we published it in a peer-reviewed journal, that medicine would have been withdrawn with that sort of correlation. But thankfully, it's only a pesticide. It's only poisonous, so we don't need to do it. We were criticised over it. They said, there's, it's just correlation, it's not real. The year after we published it, this study came out, and this shows the actual mechanism how glyphosate causes autism. So maybe it's easy if I look here. This is a nerve cell that hasn't been treated with glyphosate. This is one that's been treated with a really small amount like what we get naturally from food and the environment. So what's happened here, you can see it doesn't, the one with the glyphosate doesn't have this long line, which is called an axon. The axon is what a nerve cell puts out to join up with other nerve cells to build our neural networks. Here you can see it's now branching out like lightning. Each one of those will connect to this part of a nerve cell, which is called a dendrite, and that's how they all connect, and in the brain they build a huge network of these connections. What you're seeing now with the Roundup, it's delayed in its development. In the final development, this one has lots and lots of connections to join and build a really strong neural network. This one is delayed, it's unformed. The brain is our biggest collection of nerves, and these networks are what builds how our brain works and functions. These brains, unfortunately, are not building proper neural networks, and that's why we're getting all these psychological problems, of which autism is one, ADHD, bipolar spectrum. This study alone should have been enough to get Roundup banned. But what do? They ignore it, pretend it's never been studied, never been published. Then we talk about cancer. Cancer is an epidemic. Well, probably the most important study that ever came out was the US Cancer Panel study that showed that 80% of cancers are not caused by your genes or hereditary. It's environmental. Toxins and especially chemicals and pesticides. That's good news. That means by changing our diet, changing our environment, we could solve the cause of 80% of cancers tomorrow and use the funds for the other 20%. Cancer could be a disease in the past. But we have the evidence, say for children, for instance, how the cancer rates continue to increase, particularly children of farmers. Here, World Health Organization, actually I should get the latest ones to show this rate is still going up. We're seeing this increase in childhood cancers, but in all sorts of cancers. So this is an example, again, of Roundup. Same study, peer-reviewed. And what we're seeing here now is thyroid cancers. And the green line here is the bar of what we say, what the trend was before Roundup happened. And you can see it was fairly stable. It wasn't going up, it wasn't going down. Then something happens. Suddenly, in the mid-90s, GM crops are introduced. That's the blue line to show GM soy and GM corn. And of course, they were Roundup ready, so the Roundup goes up, and guess what? The cancer goes up. And once again, when we did the correlation, it's a 1 in 10,000 chance that this is an accident, that glyphosate is not the cause. It gets ignored. They say, it's just correlation, it could be anything. But the year later, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research in Cancer gives glyphosate the second highest level of cancer. It's called 2A. 1A is for where we have enough evidence that things definitely cause cancer in people. 2A is where the evidence clearly shows cancer in animals, limited cancer in humans. Thyroid cancer, by the way, was one, and particularly non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And there still are fights and court cases over this, and regulators like the EU has completely ignored this and allowing these poisons to be used in our food. There are other pesticides that affect the development of our nerves and the nervous system. Development of the nervous system is really important in the developing baby, in the unborn. And like I said, particularly the brain. And a lot of the pesticides are nerve poisons, like organophosphates. They're developed as nerve poisons. They damage the brain. So here, for instance, this scientist is showing that the smallest amount of organophosphate pesticides will have direct effect on the development of nerve cells, like you saw with Roundup. It stops them from developing. It poisons them, kills them. This is research done in Mexico, and looking at two groups of farmers. They were Native Americans, and one group lives in a valley, and it's a farming area, and is pesticide sprayed, and the drift goes through the valley. The other group lives in the foothills where there are no pesticides used. And they asked these 4-year-old girls to do drawings. And to me, this is just so sad, you know. Well, if we look at this one here, you know, as a parent, this is exactly what you'd expect a 4-year-old to draw. You know, it's just lovely. And you look at this, and it just breaks your heart because, you know, that child has got brain damage. By the way, this study was ignored. They said, oh, that's anecdotal, that's not hard laboratory science. But hard laboratory science has come up 4 studies later that showed that exposure to the smallest amounts, in fact, one they couldn't even find the lowest limit of these caused damage to the nerve cells and reduced the IQs of children. What I want to say here is really important. Most people aren't farmers. Most people get these pesticides from eating non-organic food. And anybody eats it will have residues. We have much more sophisticated ways of looking at it. Now, this study says everything to me, because these are MRIs of brain scans of children who are born to mothers who ate the normal American diet. And in this, they could actually show the areas in the brain where the mothers have got the most of these organophosphate pesticides ended up with the most brain damage. They could physically measure it. And so this is the slide which to me is the most important, and I can show you lots of these. Peer-reviewed science by independent scientists showing that if you eat organic food, actually within days the pesticide residues basically turn to 0. It's so simple for us to prevent it. And we get told, oh, organic is so expensive, you know. I can't afford to buy it. Well, how expensive is this? What are we doing when we have the science? We can see the damage. Not just kids are being born with autism and other problems. Here we actually have solid scientific evidence, gold standard of the damage that the so-called safe levels of pesticides are doing to our children. How expensive is this? Giving our children a lifetime of ill health? This is just too expensive to even consider. It should be banned. And in the end, this is the best value that we can give our children. And I wanted to just say here, for most of the people here, you're about to start families and start your future. Give them the best by eating organic food. And what we are doing by growing and promoting organic food, I think, is one of the most important jobs on this planet, because we are the people who are giving our planet a healthy future. Thank you.